Hello and welcome to Cut Through, Crikey's spin-free analysis of Australian news, politics and power. I'm your host, Crystal Andrews, and today I'm joined by journalist, shareholder activist and Crikey's founder, Stephen Mayne, to discuss the Murdoch family feud. Stephen, it is such a pleasure to have you on Cut Through today.
Thanks, Crystal. It's great to be here.
Let's just get straight into it. On Tuesday morning, we finally reached the end of an almost 2-year legal battle among the Murdochs for control over the family trust and therefore control over Fox and News Corp media empires once Rupert dies. He's 94, so look, who knows how long that it will take for that eventuality to come to pass. But this has essentially split the family in two, with Rupert and his favoured son, Lachlan, on one side, battling against the more progressive siblings in Prudence, Elisabeth and James. They've all now agreed to a deal, with the three siblings selling their 50% stake in the Murdoch family trust for around $3.3 billion US. On the other hand, Lachlan and Rupert have taken out a hefty loan to buy up some of those shares. But Stephen, is it accurate to call this a buyout? Maybe you can run me through some of the basics of this settlement deal.
Yes, it's a very big buyout. So going into this deal, say at the start of the week, the shares in the two companies were worth about 12.5 billion Australian dollars. Team Lachlan have agreed to pay 5 billion Australian dollars for shares that were on the market worth about 6.25 billion. So it's an 80% valuation. So they are getting them for a discount, but cash is more valuable than paper. The shares have since fallen by about 5%, and they couldn't afford to buy all the shares, so they had to sell 40% of the shares. So the $5 billion is being paid with 40% from a $2 billion share sale of both companies, Fox and News Corp, about 16% of the family's holding, and the other $3 billion will be cash. And that's where they have to take out this enormous US $1 billion margin loan, where they'll be pledging literally almost half of their shares in these two companies will be sitting with the financiers, sitting at the bank, because the bank has lent them $1 billion US to pay out the troublesome siblings. So it's absolutely a high-priced buyout, debt funded, but not 100 cents in the dollar, 80 cents in the dollar. So one level, you can say Lachlan and his fellow purchasers have got a discount.
It's not just Lachlan and Rupert who are in on this side of the deal, though, is it? It also involves some others, including two of Rupert's ex-wives. Is that correct?
Yes, well, particularly Wendy Deng. Her two daughters with Rupert, Grace and Chloe, were two of the 6 children in the trust. And of course, they're not being bought out. But when they turn 30, and they're both in their sort of early to mid-20s, when they turn 30, they were entitled to get 1/6 of the shares. So Rupert reached out to Wendy, and they have agreed to roll in with Lachlan and to stay under Lachlan's control until 2050. So there's been a 20-year extension on how long Wendy's two daughters are locked into the trust. That gives Lachlan 25 years to groom his 3 children, or however he wants to actually manage the success. And in terms of Anna Murdoch, well, there's so much discovery and documents that came out during the trial. There were some email exchanges between Anna and Rupert, which showed clearly that Anna was anti-woke and on Lachlan's side. And so I think she has been a supporter of Lachlan. So she's on board with this deal in terms of taking out the more progressive siblings.
It's fascinating that divide between the, to use your words, the woke Murdochs and the not so woke Murdochs. And it really is a generational transition that's happening here. I mean, I was reading before this parts of a series that Crikey published in 2023 called The Murdoch Century, which was stories from a range of people that was sort of reflecting on the impact and the influence of the first 100 years of the family's media empire. And you wrote a piece for that about Rupert's corporate kind of record as CEO. And in that, you argued that while it might look like he had been a better media mogul than his father Keith, that was in part because he had had a lot of luck during his reign that sort of prevented some of his bad decisions, and there were some bad decisions, from being too catastrophic for not only the companies but the family. So now that we're about to see that generational shift and kind of history repeating with Lachlan inheriting control of this empire from Rupert, what kind of media mogul do you think he will be? Like, are the conditions as favourable to him, more or less so? How do you see it?
Look, I think he's going to be politically and ideologically very similar to the old man. So he is chief defender of the old man. He is loyal to the old man. Rupert wouldn't have literally handed over voting control to Lachlan if he hadn't earned it by defending his record and promising to continue his operating style. Obviously, Fox News being the most controversial as a blatant propaganda network for Trump and the right. But I think that Lachlan won't be as big a risk taker as his father. His father literally bet the company, almost went broke, setting up B Sky B, was always looking at massive takeovers. Lachlan, I think, is a lot more conservative. He'll be nervous about the fact that there's this $1 billion margin loan. So I actually think you'll just see this sort of incremental approach, and he won't take any massive risks. He just wants to get that debt down and defend what he's got. It's sort of a legacy game. When Rupert goes, I think that anything could happen. I mean, Elon Musk could offer $20 billion for Fox News, and Lachlan could say it's too hard sharing these two public companies. I do think they will try and merge them because two chessboards is more complicated than one. So I think that's probably the first deal you'll see. And if Lachlan is worried about the debt and the fact that the voting control of the family has reduced from 42% to say 33%, it's a bit more precarious. They now only own about 17% of all the shares, voting and non-voting. So if he wants to keep the power but reduce the debt, I think the way to do that is to get rid of REA Group. So if you demerge REA Group, Lachlan could literally raise $3.5 billion for the family trust just selling their portion of REA Group, which has no power or politics or news about it. It's just a very boring real estate advertising business. So I reckon that you'll see the focus continue on news and power, risk averse from a debt point of view, and very much legacy defense of the old man, including supporting newspapers. I mean, they're the greatest supporters of newspapers left in the English-speaking world. They won't be closing print editions prematurely. They'll be the last men standing in defense of printed newspapers.
There was a report maybe a month ago or 2 months ago about them actually opening a new tabloid newspaper in LA, which is, I mean, the idea of opening a print newspaper in 2025 to me is a mind-boggling decision, but to them it makes perfect sense.
Well, that's right. It's a war on woke. You take on California and Newsom. So, yeah. But I think that those sorts of indulgences, because that will be a loss-making venture, obviously, they're harder to justify when you've just sold $2 billion worth of shares to non-family shareholders. You've got debts. So I think, you won't see too many political frolics that don't make money. Whereas with Fox News, it's the most profitable news business in the history of the world. Makes $1.5 billion a year in profit. So that's the one they'll continue. That's the cash cow. And you'll see a few little games on the side, but they won't bet the farm because they have taken on debt. And there's so much focus on Lachlan. I mean, he's sitting there in Bronte in Sydney. He's the chair of two companies worth 67 billion Australian dollars. He's just turned 54. It is enormous weight on his shoulders when his siblings are just trust fund kids, literally, with $4 or $5 billion because they got $2 billion US when the Disney deal happened in 2019, and now they've got another $1.1 billion US dollars. So they're just kicking back, and Lachlan's going to have to do all the work. That's quite a burden that he is taking on.
There's a good point, really, about the fact that Lachlan does live in Sydney with his wife and kids, and I guess is splitting his time between Sydney and the States. But that means that he has a much stronger tie to the current kind of Australian culture and the discussions that are happening here and the ways that we might be distinct to the US. In a lot of ways, we are distinct to the US. So when he does officially take the reins, do you think that we will notice any of that coming through in the perspective and the vision of these companies, News and Fox? Like, will we see a change in much of what the Australian or Sky News Australia produces, or is that going to be more noticeable in the US, or perhaps not at all?
Look, I think there isn't actually a management change as part of this deal. The rest of the adult kids were on the out. They had no influence at all. They were in the cheap sheets throwing rocks through leaks to the press and this sort of thing. So, they weren't even told that Rupert and Lachlan were appointing Tony Abbott to the board. He's on the Fox Corp board. So I think you'll just see business as usual. The last 2 years has been Lachlan's chance to be the sole executive chairman of Fox and non-executive chairman of News without his father as a voting director, because his father shuffled off 2 years ago to be emeritus chair. So the share price has gone up since then. The sky hasn't fallen in. I think there's a sense that Lachlan has not been a disaster without his father there, but his father's still emeritus chair. Everyone still rings his father. So in the sense, it's only really when his father passes that you'll really get to judge Lachlan, because they're so tight, they're still joined at the hip. They're making decisions together, even though Rupert at 94 is no longer a voting director. So it'll be business as usual from here, I think, until Rupert literally passes. And that's when you'll see the next big pivot where Lachlan shows his true colours. When Kerry Packer passed, James Packer sold out of media entirely, absolutely shocked everyone. So that's, for me, is the next big pivot point.
Do you have any sort of early feelings or early indications that you could point people to about what to expect when that does happen, when Rupert does shuffle off?
Oh, I think that Lachlan he's a legacy guy. So, and he's conscious of being the third generation. So already one of his two sons, I think it was Aiden, has already been doing work experience in Holt Street. So he's got two sons and a daughter. Remember that Rupert's got 13 grandchildren. The oldest is now 34. Rupert's oldest child, Prudence, is 69. People are getting older here. And so if this is literally going to be out to 2050 as the new trust arrangements envisage, then you will see Lachlan bringing his three children into the business, just like you saw with Rupert doing it. But then again, once Rupert passes, Lachlan might just say, I've had enough, I'm over this, and he could sell out. Anything could happen.
It does replicate in a lot of ways that the way that Rupert shifted his father's media business, into his family lineage, and I guess now the option is open to Lachlan whether he follows in his father's footsteps in the exact same way. But it has been really ugly. Stephen, I would like to put a scenario to you, a hypothetical scenario. If Rupert was your dad and Lachlan was your brother, and this had all happened the way that it has for these folks, and now you wanted to mess with them and throw kind of a spanner into the vision that they have for these companies, what would you do next?
Well, I think there is an issue as who is going to be the first Murdoch to write a book. So John Malone, Rupert's great partner, rival, 40-year history in the cable business in the US, has just written an autobiography. And he said he did it because the last book was Cable Cowboy, and it was all about him. He didn't want to be known as a cowboy. So I think that someone is going to come out with a book now that this has settled. Does Rupert try and set the record straight? Does James come out? I think you'll see, if I was trying to mess with them, obviously I'd be organising troublemakers to go to the AGMs. It's incredibly public, being the chair of two public companies. You'd be a public critic. I think you'd be, going on CNN and getting stuck into what Fox News is doing. But I think there possibly is constraints. Obviously James and his sisters can't buy shares for 12 years under the agreement. Can they compete? That's what we don't know. Is there a non-denigration clause in there? We don't know. So where they put their money, what causes they put it to, I think will be interesting. I think the sisters might be more likely to try and reconcile with their father and say, this is peace. We can't change Fox News. I suspect James is the one who will fight on. Watch out for startup businesses, donations to political causes, leaks to the press, But and the other thing is, will the Murdoch empire publicly attack James, because that's what you didn't normally see. Apart from Andrew Bolt. Andrew Bolt occasionally would come out and say, woke James Murdoch. But overall, you've never seen on Fox News, you've never seen James Murdoch cop it like the Murdochs can do to many of their critics and competitors. So I think they've always got to be wary of that, is that a full-throated, newspaper, Fox News attack on James Murdoch, the woke trust fund kid, blah, 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 that would get pretty messy, because James doesn't have that ammunition that his brother and his father do have. So I don't know. I doubt it'll be all-out war, but I think that you will see ongoing long time rivalry between Lachlan and James, because it's been going on for 15 years. They really do hate each other. They can't talk. They always brief against each other, and this has been the really messiest litigation that we've ever seen in a big, famous, powerful media family.
Yeah, you did highlight some potential areas in a piece that we've published on Crikey where there might be some weaknesses. You also have lots of experience in shareholder activism and popping up at AGMs where maybe some other shareholders might not want you to pop up. Do you think that any of the companies within the Murdoch empire are particularly vulnerable to those type of actions, though?
Oh, I think you may see some shareholder activism against News and Fox Corp, just because the level of shareholding is reduced. So it's a more precarious gerrymander. The boards are small and weak. Like, you should have more strong directors. I mean, Jack Nasser retired, the former chair of BHP, the CEO of Ford globally, and he's replaced by Tony Abbott, who's never sat on a public board and is not really a commercial guy at all. So I think there could be pressure to put credible people on the boards of those two companies, run them more commercially, be more transparent. I mean, the Murdoch family, the Murdoch men have literally taken 2 billion Australian dollars in salary and bonuses from public companies since the year 2000. I don't think Lachlan can justify a $50 million a year salary. So, if James comes out and criticises that, why you paid so much, the insiders, the relatives, I think that you can run a good, sustained governance attack on them. And then, of course, you've got the litigation issues with stolen election stuff and Trump soon. There's always litigation warfare that can be prosecuted. And maybe James Murdoch should start briefing regulators and briefing politicians about what his dad and brother have been up to, because they often rely on regulatory favour and government largesse to prevail and grow their empire. If you actually had a Murdoch family member pointing that out and advocating for a regulatory tax on the business, that would be quite powerful as well. And I think the last thing I'd say is, if I was James Murdoch, I'd just try and burgle key talent. So just go into the empire and just offer lots of money for top talent to come and work for him in his private company, and just try and drain them of talent and spread the message that it's a toxic place to be associated with. There are decent Murdochs out there. We've got billions of dollars. Come work for us. Don't work for Rupert and Lachlan, because what they do is toxic, and why would you want to be associated?
There are so many strategies available. I don't know how likely we are to see many of those in the short term, but it's certainly something long term to keep an eye on. Just to be very clear, though, Stephen, News Corp and Fox, I mean, there's been some turbulence on the stock market in the immediate aftermath of this all being announced, but this is not fundamentally changing the value of those companies, is it?
Yeah, all that's really happened here is that 3.5% of the shares all the shares on issue have been sold to public investors, or about 16.5% of the family's holding. 6 children in control with dad over the top has gone down to 3. They have debt, but they've gone from controlling 42% of the votes to 33% of the votes. So it's a reduced voting control with debt, less people, but at the end of the day, it is still Rupert and Lachlan in charge. So that's why I don't think you will see anything particularly change, except that you've now got some extremely cashed up, disaffected siblings and children. And what could they do with their money outside the tent now that they are totally gone from the empire? And that, I think, is the thing to watch for is, what do the kids all now do? Now, there are so many different Murdoch billionaires out there. What do they do with their money?
It's been framed as the end, but we're sort of only partway through this journey. Stephen, thank you so much for giving me your time and expertise today. We'll absolutely have to have you back on Cut Through again very soon.
Thanks, Crystal. Absolute pleasure. Love the podcast, and really thrilled to have been invited to contribute. Thank you.
If you're listening to us on a podcast app, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review Cut Through. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. It all helps Crikey grow and gets our independent journalism out to more people. That's all for now. We'll be back next week.